Hello, WiCCD members. My name is Maija Martin, and I am WiCCD's Education Committee Director. I'm happy to introduce our series, Finding Your Niche. In this series, we will interview female criminal defense lawyers who practice in a specific area within criminal law. The goal of our series is to highlight the work and accomplishments of female criminal defense lawyers, but it is also a way for us to introduce you to specialty areas within criminal law. We hope we can help you find your niche. Enjoy the series. Hi, Maija. How are you?
Hi, Maya. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. So yes, we'll maybe have to clarify. You're Maija and I'm Maija, but the way you spell your name is a bit different. It's a very unique way of spelling the name, or at least I'm not used to it. So
Yeah, it's Eastern European, so it's a
Mhm.
silent J.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, how about you start by introducing us to yourself, Maija?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Maija Martin. I am a criminal defense lawyer based in Toronto. I practice mainly in Toronto, but also in Nunavut. And I was trying to think about what my niche is, and I think my niche is that my practice is primarily appeals, but I do some trial work as well. And yeah, and I guess in terms of getting a little bit more specific, most of the matters I deal with are related to drug crimes, so federal drug crimes and the crimes of violence that um, come out of that. And then also, I represent people that are charged, who are charged at protests generally in Toronto as well. So it's kind of a strange niche.
And protests, yeah, and protest, is that on the civil part or criminal?
No, on the criminal side, there are a lot of people who end up getting charged as a result of various protests that happen in Toronto on kind of various different levels.
Right. And are these common cases, or do they happen like once in a while?
Um,
I mean, I guess the question is like, is it enough for you to actually develop a practice or to focus on this area?
yeah, so I mean, generally those clients don't have any money. So those are the cases that when I went to law school, I was really excited about. I'm a huge believer that the war on drugs has basically created intergenerational violence, and so I'm really interested in representing people who get caught up in that. And in Toronto, there's been a lot of over policing that happens around the various safe injection sites that are set up. So I've represented people that are charged in that context. So even though we've set up these safe injection sites and we don't want to criminalize users, the police hang around outside and arrest everybody. So in terms of developing a practice, you're not going to make a lot of money doing that, but you are going to learn the ropes in terms of charter applications, looking at the conduct of the police in terms of some of our most vulnerable citizens. So while it may not be, particularly financially rewarding, those cases tend to be really interesting. And there are a lot of people that are over policed and overcharged that need really good criminal defense help.
That's correct. And the thing is, you never know how these cases can lead to other more significant criminal cases where you could eventually make money.
That's
So,
right. And I've tried to figure out from my clients how they get my name, and I never get a straight answer. And
okay.
I think it's a real mix. I think there are people that talk to their cellmates in the jails. If they're happy with their lawyer, that name can get passed on. I think for doing appellate work, it's a bit different. Really, I think you get, or at least for me, most of the work that I get comes from other lawyers. So if you're a trial lawyer and you've lost your trial, your client may say to you, well, what can I do now? And we have a duty to tell people that they've got 30 days to appeal. And if you have the names of some good appellate lawyers that you respect, you can pass those on. I think that's where I get the bulk of my appeal clients come from, other lawyers. But yeah, also clients talking to each other. And you're quite right, Maija. There are people who will get charged with an offense who come back every year.
Yeah, sadly.
Yeah.
But okay, so that's great because you actually do have a mixed practice where you do trials, but you also do appellate work. And although it seems like you're focusing more on appellate work right now, like that's more the
That's
bulk
right.
of what you, okay. But it started off by doing more trials, I guess, as opposed to appeals, or
Yeah, no, it did. I started out mostly doing trials. When I first started out, I clerked at the Superior Court in Toronto, and then I set up my own practice right away, which is a bit crazy. I don't totally recommend that because you kind of go from an academic environment to being expected
practical.
to know.
Yeah.
That's right. And it would have been nice to have a little bit more of a bridge, but I've had my own practice since I was called, and I've been really lucky to be in a good chamber situation with other more senior lawyers who referred me work for a long time. So if you are a sole practitioner starting out, I think it's really, really important to try and make some connections with other lawyers who don't want to do a legal aid assault trial in Barrie, but you're kind of willing to do it. So I really benefited from that, especially early on. And the added benefit, besides getting cases from people, was that I had people I could go to if I had questions, if I had an ethical question or I wasn't sure, in terms of what strategy I should follow in my case. I always had people around who were willing to chat.
Okay, that's very nice. So, so you did actually start off right away as a sole practitioner. But I wanted to ask you, Maija, because I mean, you've been practicing before COVID, and so you've seen how the profession is changing now a bit since COVID, and there are now, it seems like, more and more new lawyers who are starting their own practices. Do you think that it is easier now to start a practice, or was it easier before? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's way harder. I mean, I met a lot of people who are now, colleagues and friends by getting a coffee together, at Old City Hall in the Lawyers Lounge, or, there were, lawyers I didn't know that if I had a question, I would just ask them in the hallway. So I would imagine that it's become more challenging for people starting out. And the other issue is, when I went to law school, it didn't cost what it does today. Mm-hmm. So I think there's also more of a financial pressure. So as you're starting out, it's going to be harder for you to decide what you want to specialize in if you've got these serious financial constraints. So I think it's really important as a profession, we have to make sure that we're providing mentorship and making ourselves available for people that wouldn't kind of get that other sort of informal mentorship from the courthouse.
And do you recommend that a lawyer who's starting a practice to basically just maybe take a different variety of cases as opposed to focusing on a particular area right away, or it doesn't really matter?
Well, I think you have to figure out, what void you can fill, so if you're in with other lawyers and you see that nobody wants to do a drinking and driving case, you can learn that and you can kind of fill that void. And for me, I did that a little bit with appeals. There's one other lawyer in our chambers who does some appeals, but there wasn't anyone else. So I think you may need to be sort of flexible in terms of what you're interested in doing and what you're willing to do. It's funny because, I think we all get the question, are there cases you won't do? And
right.
when other civilians ask us that question, I feel like they're talking about, sexual assault cases and murders. And of course, we all do those and those are the best cases, but I think starting out, I think you do want to keep an open mind. And I think you want to see, what you're interested in. Like you might be very interested in forensics. And so that may become, something about. You might get really good at doing 11Bs, and you can let people know, hey, I've done, 5 11B applications and I'm really good at it. You pay me, I'll do it for you. Or, if you have one in your case that you don't want to handle. I mean, I think newer lawyers, it's the networking has got to be more challenging. And I imagine there's people that that aren't working in bigger metropolitan centers who, are kind of on their own and are going to need to be, cold calling lawyers in other places for work. And that's really hard.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, like we do feel the difference between the pre-COVID era and post-COVID, and the courthouses everywhere are very empty compared to how they used to be before. So it must be very different right now. But going back then to what you were saying about your practice, because you said you practice mainly in Toronto, but also you mentioned Nunavut. So maybe you can explain to us, like, how did that happen?
Well, I was I'm from Newfoundland. I love winter. I was kind of looking for a different challenge in my practice. And David Berg, who is now a judge in Ottawa, used to go up there all the time. And I met him at Old City Hall in the Lawyers Lounge, and we kind of started chatting. And he was the one that got me into it. And it's fascinating work up there. It's like a lawless land in some ways. It's there's a lot of opportunity for good lawyers to do work up there. I think, especially when it comes to appeals, it's a very different kind of setting. And yeah, so I've been going up there since 2017. I highly recommend it. When I was clerking, it was recommended to me that I go work in the north, and I wasn't ready to relocate at that point. But I think it's really good advice, because if you're somebody who is interested in doing really serious criminal work, like in your first year or two of practice, there's ample opportunity up there for you to work on a murder and do that kind of thing. So, if anyone is specifically interested in that, they can contact me, and I can put them in touch with people. But it's really quite rewarding, and it's very different from the downtown Toronto lawyering, that's for sure.
And how is it different from the downtown Toronto criminal cases?
Well, it's a much smaller community. Most of the lawyers work for the Nunavut Legal Aid. I think there's only one or two panel lawyers who are not officially employees of Nunavut Legal Aid. So it's a tiny community. There's only a handful of judges there, so the legal issues are quite different. And I think everybody has this belief that because Nunavut was supposed to be kind of an Indigenous focused kind of new territory, that necessarily has informed the justice system. And unfortunately, it really hasn't. What we see is offenders in Nunavut get much longer sentences than people down south. Those kinds of things. So there's some real kind of difficult systemic problems that, having some firebrand lawyers go up there and deal with would be amazing.
And was it easy for you, not being from Nunavut, to actually get cases there? I mean, were they receptive to that, or do they? I mean, how was the reaction?
They need defense lawyers. They need defense lawyers up there bad.
Defense lawyers.
So
right?
I've had some private clients, and then I've had some through Nunavut Legal Aid. The bulk of the defense work there is through Nunavut Legal Aid, but there are some private clients. And
you still go up there, or?
I do. I'm going up. I'm actually doing a jury trial there in February, so I'll be going to Kingate in a few weeks.
So maybe if we can just explore this a bit, because for someone who either practices in two different bars or is called to do two different bars, like, how do you manage? Because I guess there's a lot of traveling, so it is time consuming on your part. Like, it's you have to prepare, but you also need to travel. So how do you manage when you're practicing in two different jurisdictions?
Yeah. So one thing to mention is there's obviously different law societies have different rules about like I'm called in Ontario. I'm actually also called in Nunavut. You can't practice there without being called. Other provinces have different arrangements with Ontario where you are allowed to work a certain number of hours, but Nunavut is a little bit different. I don't mind the traveling. I actually find I get a lot of work done on the plane. There's something about, not having the phone or the email, like I can actually do some reading and some thinking. So it suits me fine to do that. I don't, the majority of my practice is in Toronto. Like I would say probably 80% of my practice is here. So it's not like I'm splitting my time. I know there's people that do that in Canada. They kind of, will go between New Brunswick and Toronto, or Nova Scotia and Toronto. And I think it's it's interesting to see how they do things differently in different parts of the country. You know, I think it's something people should consider, because I think, especially in Toronto, we sometimes think that, you know, the way we do it is always the right way, and there's different ways to approach things sometimes.
Right. And it's something that you obviously enjoy. And as you said, you were recommending this experience for people who are willing to try that.
I think especially for junior counsel who are struggling, I can imagine that there are people who have, you know, set up their practice, paid their insurance, paid their law society fees, and they don't have any clients, you know. And if you're in that boat, doing work for Nunavut Legal Aid could be really interesting, and could also help sort of fill some of those gaps too.
Okay. And going then back to appellate work. So how do you, because I mean, trials are very demanding. There's a lot of preparation for the trials, but then appeals are also demanding, but on a different level. There's a lot of readings that we have to do for the transcripts, a lot of writing. So it's impressive that you're actually able to manage all of that. It's a pretty wide range of things, or different things that you're doing in your practice. So how do you fit the appeals into that?
Yeah, I mean, great question at the moment. I mean, I'm always a little bit behind on the appeals, and you know, the reality of having a mixed practice is that trials will always take priority, because you know, you have clear deadlines, and you know, there's things that come up that have to be dealt with that you can't put off. I try and make sure that I've got enough time in my schedule to actually dedicate to the appellate part of my practice, and you know, I'm not somebody who is like in a trial every day. So I do tend to have a lot of time and a lot of room to do the thinking and the reading that's involved with appellate work. I mean, trials are very demanding, but in some ways they're more discreet, you know, that you know that for the month leading up to your big trial and during the trial, that's all you're going to be doing. With appeals, they're probably the same amount of time, but they just get spread out over a longer period, and you've got to deal with like your own procrastination within that, you know. So so that can be sort of challenging. I think balancing both is really tricky, but I find it very rewarding, because until I did appeals, there were like rules of evidence that I didn't fully understand the rationale for it. And when you see it from the other side, you're like, oh, wait, right. That's why I have to object, even though I know I'm going to lose the objection. Because if this goes to an appeal, that's going to become a whole separate issue. So I think it's great to do both, because they really inform each other. But it is it's difficult on your life. I'll just say that, to do both. I have a great associate who you know, really helps with that stuff.
And Maija, because you started your practice right away as a sole practitioner, how did you eventually get into doing appeals? Like, how does that happen when you're not in from, was it from the referrals from other lawyers who were in chambers with you, or how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, that was basically it. Like I sort of, you know, said I was up for anything people had that they wanted me to do. And so for a long time I did, you know, set dates and guilty pleas and trials. And then, yeah, I was asked to work on some appeals, and I found them really interesting. So, I mean, you can let people know that you're interested in that kind of work, because I think there's a lot of lawyers who are like, oof, I don't do appeals, I just do trials, go find somebody else. And so if you're in a community where that's the case, you know, you can become the person that knows how to navigate the Court of Appeal in your region. There do tend to be, you know, a lot of specific rules. And if you can figure out how to navigate that maze, that will be a real leg up for you too. So I think, you know, I think being open and letting people know that that's what you're interested in.
And do you also do appeals in Nunavut, or is that only in Toronto?
I do. I mostly do appeals in Nunavut.
Okay.
And it's interesting because the Nunavut Court of Appeal, they don't have their Court of Appeal is made up of judges from Alberta and the Northwest Territories, and then judges from the Nunavut Court of Justice are elevated kind of ad hoc. So they don't have a constant, that's not the same court all the time, which is also interesting.
Okay, nice. And I also wanted to ask you, Maija, so because you mentioned that in Nunavut, you have to be actually called to the bar there. So how is the process though? Like, is there an exam that you have to write, or do you have to go to school? Like in Quebec, there's bar school.
No, there's no exam. I can't remember the exact process. I think, you need a current member of the bar to vouch for you and that kind of thing. And then you have to pay your fees and then you're actually sworn in, kind of thing. But it's not like, no, it's not like going to California or anything like that, where you have to
Okay.
write a whole new bar.
And so one other aspect of your practice that maybe I would also like to talk about, it's the nature of the cases that you're doing, because you did mention that you do a lot of drug cases and violent cases, like
Mhm.
I'm guessing homicides and sex assaults.
Mhm.
So how did you develop this? I mean, I don't know if it's a niche necessarily, but how did you get into these types of cases? Because I think for most criminal defense lawyers, ultimately, those are the types of cases that you want to get into, like the serious drug cases, the homicides. So how did that happen in your case?
Yeah, I mean, I was quite lucky. Again, being in a great chambers helps. Where I was second chair on a lot of matters, and then I was referred the matters that nobody else wanted to do. One of the things that I did is I made myself available to draft applications for people. There are a lot of busy trial lawyers that just couldn't be bothered to, they want to bring the Section 8, but they don't want to have to actually do it. And so I spent a lot of time in my first couple of years drafting those kinds of applications. And that's a real time saver for other lawyers. And yeah, so, getting good at search warrants is a great idea. And, sex assault litigation has gotten quite complex in terms of the various 278, 276 applications. So getting good at that, and especially with lawyers who are older, they don't always want to have to learn, the newest law. And it's, I mean, obviously that's our job to know all of that. So if you can be sort of the person in your community or in your chambers who is an expert in 276, you're going to have a booming business because people are very confused about what needs to happen now.
Yeah, and sadly, there are more and more sex assault cases right now. So there's
Yeah,
certainly a lot of work in this
yeah, for
area.
sure.
Yeah. And I mean, thing is, like, not a lot of lawyers also want to necessarily, like you said, do all the work that is involved in these cases. So that would be a good opportunity for younger lawyers to get some work done. And
Yeah.
maybe if you can also tell us, because this is an interview for WiCCD, which is as you know, you're part of WiCCD as well. You're on the executive. Um, have you, because you've been practicing, I mean, you're a more senior member of the bar, so you've seen how the practice of law has evolved for female lawyers. Uh, Maybe if you can give us your perspective on the evolution, like, do you feel that there is any difference? Do you feel like things are better now for female lawyers? Do you find like they have more opportunities now, or is it worse? What is your take on that?
Yeah. I mean, my the way that, like, the way that I describe, the misogyny that we face, for me, I mean, I'm a particular kind of woman. I'm an older white woman. And so, I kind of have more clout than someone else, someone who's younger or someone who's racialized. Right. And so I think what happens with women in this profession, with people who are not white, with, is that they don't come with like the built-in credibility that the older white dudes do. Right. If an older white dude stands up and says something, everyone's going to believe that what he's saying is true. Whereas if you're a woman, they're kind of going to be not totally sure at first. You have to prove yourself, right? You've got to, you got to do a cross examination. You've got to, do a tough appeal. You've got to, be articulate in court. And then people start to take you seriously. So I think the problem is we don't start with the presumption of credibility. And, we've heard from a lot of racialized lawyers that it's the same kind of thing. They go into a courtroom, people assume that they're the interpreter. And so I think it's this sort of like presumed credibility that we've got to tear down. And I think it's still a problem. I feel like for myself, I'm now largely immune to that because people do know who I am, and I've kind of been around for a little while, and I am older. And with me, I actually went to law school later in life, so people think that that I'm a more senior lawyer than I am. Like there's kind of these biases that we have, right? That smaller, younger women don't know what they're doing, when of course that's not true. So I think we still have a long ways to go. As an older white woman, people listen to me now, right? But so I think we still have to we have to figure out, how can we create a profession where everybody comes in, and is treated with kind of the same respect. And I think we still have a bit of a ways to go on that.
But do you see any improvements on that front?
That's a good question. I mean, I've seen it for me, but I think it's because I've gotten older. So I don't know if compared to 10 years ago, it's necessarily gotten better. I think we still have this, presumed credibility problem that is, tied to factors that have nothing to do with how well you do your job.
Hopefully things will start to change though.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Maija, for taking the time to meet with me. I know you have very busy practice and schedule, and I mean, we didn't talk too much about that, but in addition to doing trials, appeals in Toronto and in Nunavut, you also are involved in so many associations, including WiCCD, Criminal Lawyers Association. I don't know if you're involved in anything else, but I'm sure you are. So thank you so much for taking the time. It was really a pleasure to talk to you. I mean, I do see you when we work on other projects, but it's nice to have had that time to chat with you about your practice. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me. And, if anybody is interested in working in the North, like please feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to chat about it.
Thank you. And you, well, since you mentioned your email, you do have, I know you're on LinkedIn. You have, so what are your socials? If people want to
LinkedIn,
find you?
that's it.
LinkedIn. Okay. But
yeah,
you have a website?
I do. I have a website,
and your
but
email.
I'm not on Twitter or anything like that. I need to stay focused.
Yeah.
So I need to, I can't have too many distractions, but yeah, my email is on my website. Like, please feel free to email me.
Thank you very much, Maija. And it was really very nice to talk to you today.
Yeah, thanks.